on planet Earth, known to us today as the ancient Egyptians. But coming out of high school, being indoctrinated with the school system that had taught me up to that point, I took what information that Sun Ra gave me and stored it away in my subconscious mind until 20 years later, I found myself in Italy on a tour there. And the tour guide was showing us all of the ruins and the history of the Romans and the Italians and etc. And I felt very bad because I had nothing to show the world as a Negro but slavery. So when this tour guide on the Rome bus said over the intercom system, when the Romans went to Egypt to receive their civilization, something lit up inside of me, something illuminated inside of me. And at that point, I recall what Sun Ra had told me and the rest of the guys 20 years prior to that, that we were descendants of the greatest people that has ever existed on this earth, known to us today as the ancient Egyptians. And that's how it all began.
Mm-hmm. Now, you have done quite a bit of research, I understand, in terms of Egypt and the origins of Christianity. I just want to let you, if you would for us, kind of lay out a chronology of Christianity, how it came about, when it came about. Is it not an accurate assessment of a religion that comes out of Egypt, Africa? What's your feelings? What's your research tell us in regard to Christianity?
Well, let's start with religion, period. Mm-hmm. Let's start and go back during the time of antiquity. The word antiquity means ancient times. Mm-hmm. You'll find that the ancient Egyptians, who are Africans, living in the continent of Africa, and the rest of the Africans throughout Africa, practice no religion. You will also find that no race of people on earth during the time of antiquity practiced a religion of any kind whatsoever. Now, here come the European into the continent of Africa, in Egypt. We're talking about Alexander the Greek in 332 BCE, coming in Africa. That is the beginning of the creation of man-made religions, because all religions are man-made. No human on earth was born with a religion of any kind. All humans of all races, creeds, and color are born with an indwelling spirituality that their Creator gave to them at the time of their birth after using their mother and father as human instruments to bring the human being into this world, giving them an indwelling spirituality. And that indwelling spirituality is in tune and in place and in touch with the omnipotent universal spiritual consciousness. In other words, that individual's creator is inside of them. Mm-hmm. And the human being is kept in constant contact with their individual creator by way of their pineal gland. What is a pineal gland? A pineal gland is a sensor organ that sits in the middle of your brain. And the bottom of that pineal gland is your nostrils. What do you do with your nostrils? You intake air to keep that indwelling spirit alive inside of you. And once that indwelling spirit is kept alive, then you, the human being, is kept in constant contact with your creator. You can communicate back and forth with your creator. Now, going back to ancient Egypt, the ancient Egyptians did not practice a religion, okay? They practiced what is known as a spiritual way of life. They knew the cosmic laws of the universe. They practiced a concept that is known to us today as the Ma'athian principle, or the principle of Ma'at. Truth, justice, peace, love, and wisdom. This is their whole concept on how they conducted their life. These are the principles that they used. Also, they paid homage to nature, the nature that was created by the omnipotent universal spiritual creator, such as the sun, the moon, the stars, the earth, the animals, humanity, etc. They, the ancient Egyptians, civilized this whole entire planet. And of course, as you know, that the Europeans terrorized this whole entire planet, including themselves. So here come Alexander the Greek into Egypt. Repeat what I just said prior, that the whole world, including the continent of Africa and the ancient Egyptians, practiced no religion, because there was no such thing as a religion on earth. So when Alexander the Greek came into Egypt, seeing the great and grand and glorious civilization that our ancestors, the ancient Egyptians, had created in Egypt, in the continent of Africa, they wanted to be made part of that civilization. They knew, the Greeks knew, that in order to rule Egypt, they had to be accepted in the ancient Egyptian sacred society, the priesthood. They knew that. Alexander tried to get himself admitted into the sacred society of ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptians rejected Alexander. And Alexander died in 323 BCE. His successor was Ptolemy I Lagi, called Soter. The word S-O-T-E-R means savior. Okay? Now, Ptolemy I Lagi, called Soter, was a European white man with long flowing hair and a beard, a facial beard, and blue eyes. He wanted to get himself admitted into the ancient Egyptian priest society also. But also, they rejected him like they did Alexander. But he came up with a devious, cunning idea to get himself accepted into the ancient Egyptian sacred society. He said to a group of priests and priestesses in Memphis, Egypt, said, if you could make my image into a god, so my image could be accepted into the rest of the priest societies around and throughout Egypt, then we Greeks and you ancient Egyptians will have a common deity in your sacred society. So the only sacred priest society that would accept his offer was in Memphis, Egypt. They, the priests and priestesses of that sacred society in Memphis, Egypt, took two of their ancient Egyptian gods, such as Osiris and the bull representative of Ra, Apis, and put those two names together and made a composite name of Osiris. Giving the name Osiris or Serapis to this Greek ruler, Ptolemy I Lagi, called Soter. So the image of Ptolemy I, called Soter, is now Serapis, been given a name by this priest society in Memphis, Egypt. Okay? They tried to get his image with this new name, Serapis, into the rest of the societies around Egypt. The ancient Egyptian priest society at that time rejected that idea because the ancient Egyptians did not allow or accept any foreigners in their sacred society. There was no integration during that time. The ancient Egyptians did not integrate with other races of people, and the other races of people did not integrate with other races of people. throughout the world. Okay? So now, here you have a entire priest society in Egypt rejecting this Greek ruler, Ptolemy I Lagi, called Soter. What he did at that point was to close down all of the sacred temples throughout Egypt, except for the one in Memphis, Egypt, that created his image into a supposed god. Then he, as being the Ptolemaic ruler of Egypt, of the sovereign head of Egypt, he became the vicar of his own image. In other words, the same as. The word vicar means the same as. And every succeeding Greek Ptolemy and the Romans, which the Romans and the Greeks are one and the same, whoever ruled Egypt, they sat in the rulership of Egypt, being the vicar of Serapis. Okay? What they did at this point was try to get the ancient Egyptians, at that time they were then Coptic Egyptians, to accept this image as a god on equal terms as the Coptic Egyptians accepted Osiris, their ancient Egyptian deity. But that was rejected. So what he did, he closed down all of the temples throughout Egypt. He confiscated all of their divine scroll written manuscripts, housed them into the temple in Memphis, Egypt. And he did not allow the priests and priest society of Egypt to build any other temples for spiritual fellowship. So what they did, they took to their homes to have spiritual fellowship together. Okay? So, in the meantime, every Greek ruler and every Roman ruler would try to get this image that we know today as Jesus the Christ. Then it was known as Serapis. One has to follow Serapis throughout history. And once you do that, then you will see the progression of how Christianity and how this Christ image, or how the Serapis image was transformed into the Christ image, or into the name Christ. History is the only entity that will give you the closest facts for an individual to understand that progression. History is made up of 4 components: time, people, places, and events. That is the glue that make up history. That's the substance that make up history. Real time, real places, real people causing and creating real events. So now here you have, through the process of time. Now let me go back a little bit. The image and the name of Ptolemy I Lagi, called Soter, was given this name Serapis by the Coptic Egyptians in Memphis, Egypt. The year was 320 BCE. So from 320 BCE all the way until BCE times ran out, and we're going into another area or era of history, I had to label it ABCE. That's in my book called The Historical Origin of Christianity. That's the term I invented, ABCE. I'm the first person that I know of that uses that term. Okay? Because I created it, of course. It means that after BCE ran out, because there's never been a man that ever walked the earth in human form of any race, creed, or color by the name of Jesus Christ never existed. It's a myth. So therefore I couldn't use AD because I would be historically incorrect. So from 320 BCE, we're going to give a short overview, but everything else has been written and documented in my book, The Historical Origin of Christianity. But I'm going to give you a short overview to get to some of the main points. So from 320 BCE, all the way to the time of the first council meeting. We're talking about the Council of Nicaea I, or the Nicene Council. In my book, I'm the only historian that's bringing this out. There was 3 major events that caused the Council of Nicaea I in 325 ABCE to come about. Those 3 things are: 1, the Donatist schismatic controversy; 2, the donation of Constantine; 3, the strong statement of Arius in 319. All 3 of those historical events caused the Council of Nicaea to come about, or the Nicene Council to come about. And this is 325 ABCE. This is what happened. Anybody who studied the ancient Egyptian culture, they will come across the ancient Egyptian divine triad, which consists of Osiris the father, Horus Jr. the son, the S-U-N, this is very important, the S-U-N, and Isis, the Holy Hathor Ka mother. You will find those as being the ancient Egyptian divine triad. Okay? Now, at the Council of Nicaea, they took this European image by the name of Serapis, which is nothing but the image of Ptolemy I, Lagi, called Sotar. And I told you how that image of Ptolemy I, Lagi, called Sotar, who was a successor of Alexander the Greek, how his image was given a composite name using the 2 deities of the ancient Egyptian culture, came about in 320 BCE, how that name was applied to that Greek Ptolemaic ruler. So now here you have, at the Council of Nicaea, a group of Melkite Coptic Egyptians who caused this council meeting to come about. But before this council meeting came about, the donation of Constantine was given to a Coptic Egyptian by the name of Sylvester I. This is all historical. This is all historical evidence. This is what I'm talking about. Anybody can go and get themselves a set of encyclopedia and investigate what I'm saying. And it's all there. Okay? Now, this donation of Constantine was given in 313 and 314 to Sylvester I by Constantine, the Greek ruler or the Roman ruler of Egypt and the Byzantine Empire. Okay? Now, the donation of Constantine goes like this. Every Greek ruler and every Roman ruler who sat on the throne and ruled Egypt sat on the throne as the vicar of Serapis, just like the Pope in the Vatican sits on the throne as the vicar of Christ. These Greek and Roman rulers sat on the throne of Egypt as the vicar of Serapis, who later became Christ. And we're going to get to that part. It was always a constant desire of any Greek ruler and Roman ruler after Ptolemy I Lagi Sotar's death for the exterior Coptic community to accept this white image as God. And they totally rejected that. Only the Melkite Uncle Tom Coptic Egyptians accepted this image because they were the ones, and their brethren and sisters before them created this image or this name of Serapis, which was given to this Ptolemaic ruler, Ptolemy I Lagi, called Sotar. Now, here's how the donation of Constantine worked. After the Donatist schismatic controversy came about, and we're talking about 302, 303, ABCE, in North Africa, because it's listed in the encyclopedia and your dictionaries, some dictionaries, when you look up the Donatist schismatic controversy, it says a North African schismatic controversy. The Donatist schismatic controversy was over a group or a member of the Coptic community turning over certain writings to Diocletian, who was the Roman ruler at that time. We're talking about 303, 305. Now, mind you, that Coptic community, who I call the exterior Coptic community, did not accept Serapis as a god. Okay? So they were under constant persecution at all times by the Greek and Roman rulers of Egypt. So now, mind you, these Greek and Roman rulers, like I said before, had for many years tried to get that community to accept this white image as a god, but they were always rejected. So now here comes the Donatist schismatic controversy. The controversy that caused a split in the African Coptic Egyptian community was the Donatist schismatic controversy, simply because members of that community turned over sacred writings to Diocletian in 303, 305. And that was against the principles of that Coptic Egyptian exterior community. They didn't agree with that. They said that Mansurius should have allowed himself to be persecuted by the Roman rulers rather than to turn over the documents. So that caused a split there, a breakup. And it reminds me of the time in Chicago, Illinois. I'm from Chicago. During the time of Harold Washington, a lot of you have heard and know about Harold Washington, okay? When Harold Washington came to be the mayor in 1983, our African community in Chicago were unified, 100% strong behind Harold Washington. When he died in 1987, our community was split because the white structure, we're talking about the white political structure in Chicago, picked a member from our race that we didn't want to be the mayor. They picked him for us, for him to be the mayor. And then that was Eugene Sawyer. And then this guy, Tim Evans, had a group that wanted him to be the mayor. So what happened there is that this caused a schism there, a split, a weakness, because prior to that, we were 100% unified, okay, as one body, one political body. This split caused a white man by the name of Richard M. Daley to come up between this schismatic controversy in Chicago to become the mayor, because it weakened our voting power.
Correct.
Okay? So now, this is the same thing that the Donatist schismatic controversy did in Egypt. You see? So Constantine said, wow, this is a good time for me to find someone in the Coptic Egyptian community to accept Serapis, which is this white image, as a god. And what he did with this individual, whom he found in Sylvester I, he told Sylvester, said, listen, Sylvester, I'm going to give you my imperial emblems of power on a temporal basis. And you will have temporal power over your brothers and sisters in the Coptic community. Okay? Whether they be Melkite Egyptians or whether they be Monophysite Egyptians. Whatever the case. So this deal was struck. And the second thing that Constantine wanted to do was to get himself baptized in that community. This is the key. This is very key. So once Constantine was baptized in that community, he became just a member of that community, because he had given his imperial authority and power to Sylvester I. He had no more power over the Coptic Egyptians in and throughout Africa under his rule. The authority was now in the hands of Sylvester I. So what he did, the job that he gave to Sylvester by giving him the donation of Constantine. Now what you do, Sylvester, go out and you get the rest of the Coptic Egyptians living in and around Egypt to accept this white image as their God. Sylvester was unable to do that. And Constantine, after giving this donation of Constantine, what is known as in history as the donation of Constantine, to Sylvester I, there was a Coptic Egyptian by the name of Arius, who said, after Sylvester accepted the donation of Constantine from Constantine, who said that this Serapis, then known as Serapis, known today as Jesus the Christ, was a created creature, a perfect creature, but a creature nevertheless. And those three historical events, the Donatist schismatic controversy, the donation of Constantine, and a strong statement by Arius, caused the Council of Nicaea I to come about in 325 ABCE. At that council meeting, this is what they did. The Melkite Coptic Uncle Tom, bourgeois Egyptians, this is what they did. They took the image of Serapis, known to us today as Jesus the Christ, and inserted that white male created creature image into the ancient Egyptian divine triad by taking out Horus Jr., the S-U-N, the son of Osiris, the son of Isis, and putting in his place this European image, or this white image that we know today as Jesus Christ, then known as Serapis, into that ancient Egyptian divine trinity or triad. Okay? So that is how this Nicene Council, or the Council of Nicaea, came about. Now when this white image, who is the S-O-N, and you heard the term that Jesus Christ is the Son of Man. Have you ever heard that, Reverend?
Yes, absolutely.
this is what they meant, because Jesus Christ is the Son of Man, and man can only create a creature. Man cannot create anything with life in it unless he is mated with a goddess or a female. But man singularly cannot create anything but a creature, something that's spiritless, something that has no life to it. So that term, when you hear that term, Jesus Christ, the Son of Man, that's true, because Jesus Christ was created by man, thereby can only be called a creature without a human nature. Okay? And this created creature was now inserted into the ancient Egyptian divine Trinity. And when that was done, he was put in place of Horus, the S-U-N of that Trinity, thereby being the S-O-N, and of the Father. Now, who is the Father? Osiris is the Father. Isis is the mother. Okay? And once that was done, they are calling that the Homogeneous Creed. See? The Homogeneous Creed and the Nicene Creed is one and the same. All of this is explained in my book. Then you go to the next council meeting, 56 years later in 381, the Council of Constantinople I. At that council meeting, what went on there was that they took the homogeneous Nicene Creed and made it the official creed of the Roman Byzantine government. See? The first order of business, starting at that council meeting and succeeding to the rest of the council meeting, the first order of business was this: the homogeneous creed, the reciting of the homogeneous creed. This is how the creed was recited. God the Father, talking about Osiris now. God the Son, talking about Serapis, now known to us today as Jesus Christ, one and the same. That's the homogeneous Nicene Creed. God the Father, God the Son, the same. This is all history. Has nothing to do with what I believe. I have done 25 years of research to come to this point. I have an award of $5,000 to give to anybody of any race, creed, or color that can repudiate when I say that there's never been a man that ever walked the earth in human form of any race, creed, or color by the name of Jesus Christ. Repudiate that and you have $5,000 coming from me. Show me where a Jesus Christ exists or existed on earth in human form. Okay? So now, that was the business of the Council of Constantinople I, to make the homogeneous Nicene Creed the official creed of the Roman Byzantine Empire. Then, Reverend, we're going to go up to the most important council meeting that has ever existed on earth. The council meeting that I'm talking about is the Council of Ephesus in 431.
Let me ask you one question.
Sure.
Before we go to the Council of Ephesus. What was it in those sacred manuscripts that the priesthood did not want given to the Greeks?
It was nothing. See, those sacred manuals and manuscripts that the priesthood had stored in their temples, their sacred temples, was confiscated once those temples was closed down and taken and stored in the temple in Memphis, Egypt. Okay? They were written in hieroglyphics. The Greeks coming into Egypt were illiterate. They couldn't read it anyway. There's never been an institution that ever came out of Greece during the time of antiquity, because the Greeks had no alphabet. See, George G.M. James in his Stolen Legacy has given our community some misinformation. He said that the Greeks studied with the ancient Egyptians. That's totally historically incorrect. How can and why would the ancient Egyptians, who at that time and still are the highest civilized people on planet Earth, the only people during the time of antiquity that were literate, the rest of the world were illiterate, the reason being that the ancient Egyptians was the highest civilized people on earth, because they had such a high spirituality that was in tune with omnipotent universal cosmic order. That's number one. And that by them being the world's first and oldest civilized people, everything that was created came by and through that culture and civilization, such as paper, pen, ink, the alphabet. They had three forms of writing: the hieroglyphics, hieratic, demotic, and the phonetic. That's all in my book. Okay? Furniture was invented and used by the ancient Egyptians. Eating utensils, mathematics, science, domesticating the earth, domesticating the animals, building and living in brick buildings. The whole concept of what we know today and take granted to be civilization came through that one race of African people in the continent of Africa, in Egypt, by a people that's known to us today as the ancient Egyptians. Okay? Now, they are the ones that created civilization. And let me tell you something about the alphabet. The alphabet can only be invented one time. So whoever created the alphabet, that was it. Who created the alphabet, the world's first form of writing in the alphabet, was the ancient Egyptians. So the Greeks coming into Egypt under Alexander the Greek were uncivilized savages. They had no alphabet. They were illiterate. Why would the ancient Egyptians take some illiterate people into their sacred society who cannot read or write, who is uncivilized, who is a savage? What are they going to teach them? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. They were not running a kindergarten. So the Greeks were illiterate. So they had confiscated the ancient Egyptians' manuscripts after closing down the temples throughout Egypt. This is what Ptolemy I Lagi did, because the ancient Egyptian sacred society would not accept his image in their priest society. Okay? Now, you heard of the Great Library of Egypt, haven't you? There are many stories about the Great Library of Egypt. I'm deviating a little bit, but this is good, because we are right here at this subject. Good. You've heard all kinds of stories about the Great Library of Egypt, that Alexander was a student of Aristotle. Aristotle was supposed to have been his teacher. There's never been an Aristotle. Never been. They say that Plato was the teacher of Aristotle. They said that Socrates was the teacher of Plato. Never been a Socrates, never been a Plato, never been an Aristotle, never been a Herodotus, never been a Homer, never been a Pythagoras. There's never been a Solon, never been any of those Greek names. They said that Alexander created the Great Library of Egypt to house the hundreds of books that Aristotle supposedly have written.
Collected.
Well, supposed to have written. Okay? They say that he wrote these books. This is what is stated in history. Walter Williams comes back and says, that's not true. The reason being, and what makes it not to be true, is this. The question that I ask anybody who repudiate what I'm saying is that what alphabet did these Greek names use? Because all of these Greek names, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Herodotus, Homer, Pythagoras, Solon, etc., supposed to have existed prior to 332 when Alexander entered Egypt.
Correct.
So what alphabet did these Greek names use? Because the Greeks had no alphabet whatsoever. Because they were illiterate. This is how the Greek language got an alphabet. When Alexander the Greek came into Egypt and forced the Greek language on our ancient Egyptian ancestors, they, being a literate people, applied one of their alphabets to the Greek language, and that was the phonetic alphabet, the one that we're using every day. Okay? They applied the phonetic alphabet because the phonetic alphabet that we use every day, you can write and use that alphabet by the sounds.
Correct.
See, if an individual don't know how to spell a certain word, you tell that person, use your phonetics.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
That's right.
So when they learned the Greek language, they began to write it. So the Greek language, an alphabet was applied to the Greek language, but the Greeks never had an alphabet. Only their language, an alphabet was applied to by the ancient Egyptians. And so in later years, they claimed to have an alphabet, which is historically incorrect because I, Walter Williams, knows the difference. And I'm telling our African community the difference. Whether you want to argue with me or not, you cannot argue with me because I have just stated facts to you. And facts are stronger than argument, more profound than reasoning, more dependable than opinions. Silences dispute, supersedes predictions, and facts always end the argument. Once you present facts, that ends the argument. Unless, of course, that you're talking to someone that don't want to accept the facts.
So before I interrupt you, you were talking about the most important council, the Council of Nice.
No, the Council of Ephesus.
Ephesus, you just
Yeah, in 431.
Okay, good.
The reason why this is the most important council meeting for the creation of Christianity and Christ is this. The monophysites. Now, what is a monophysite? A monophysite is a Coptic Egyptian who says that the image of Serapis, known to us today as Jesus Christ, had an Osiris-like spirit, but no human nature. See, mono means one. No human nature is very important. So what the Melkite, Uncle Tom, bourgeois Egyptians did, they called a council meeting that is known today in history as the Council of Ephesus 431. Now, you know that in order for anyone or any person on earth to be a human being, has to pass through the body of a female.
That's correct.
Of a woman. You cannot be a human being unless you pass through the body of a female. So now, the problem now in the African community in Egypt and the polemic between the Melkite and the monophysite Coptic Egyptian is whether this image of Serapis that we know today as Jesus Christ had a human nature. Now, in order to get or have a human nature, like I said before, you have to come through the body of a female. Now, this is what they did to get this Serapis image that's known today as Jesus Christ, a human nature. This is what they did. They went into the ancient Egyptian divine triad, and they took Isis out of that divine triad, and they put in her place a created creature by the name of the Virgin Mary, giving this Virgin Mary the title of Theotokos, The word Theotokos means the mother of God. And they took this created creature with this title of Theotokos, the Virgin Mary, and they amalgamated this created creature, Serapis, with the created creature, the Virgin Mary, with the title of Theotokos, the mother of God. And the Coptic Melkite Egyptians said when this was done, when this union was done, that this image that was known as Serapis, now known today as Jesus Christ, is now the anointed one. And it is now the Messiah. I didn't say Messiah. A-H, I didn't say that. A-S, that's the difference. A-H can only be used for the religion of Judaism. A-S, you use the Messiah that's spelled with A-S on the end can be used for Christianity only. So the Coptic Egyptian said, now this image is the Messiah. And in Coptic Egyptian Greek, because the Greek language was forced on them when Alexander came into Egypt, so they were now beginning to speak Greek. So in the Coptic Egyptian spoken Greek, the term Messiah, or the anointed one, means Christos, or in English, Christ. So at the Council of Ephesus is where that image that was then known as Serapis became the Christ. You see, through a process. You see? So that was in 431. Now let's go back to the beginning when this image was created in 320 BCE using the image of Ptolemy I Lagi, the Greek ruler, and the success of Alexander the Greek after his death in 323. You see? So that was a process of time of 751 years before you get this image of Serapis into the image and the name Christ, which is a title. See, people, you go to church, they've been indoctrinated into the religion called Christianity at an early age, know nothing about Christianity, because they become believers, and they use their faith, and they use the literature that's attached to these various religions to keep their belief alive. But see, what I'm talking about is facts, historical facts, has nothing to do with what Walter Williams believed. What I believe is strictly unimportant. Am I telling you the truth? Yes. That's the key. That's the question that has to be asked. Am I, Walter Williams, telling you the truth? If I'm not telling you the truth, then put what's the truth in the place of what I'm not telling you as being the truth, and write it up in a repudiating manuscript. Says, Walter Williams, I disagree with you. There was a man that walked this earth in human form by the name of Jesus Christ, and then write it up for me and you get a $5,000 award. Okay? Now, let's go back. Oh, before I go back, let's go 20 years later. And we come to the Council of Chalcedon, 451. Now the dispute is still going on in the Monophysite community and in the Melkite community, whether this Christ now had a human nature. See, in my research in my book that I'm doing for the historical origin of Islam, whereby I'm saying there's never been a man that ever walked the earth in human form by the name of the Prophet Muhammad. When in my doing that research, Reverend Brown, I came across the understanding that this polemic argument went on for 921 years over whether this image that we know today as Jesus Christ had a human nature. So now, if this Jesus Christ had a human nature or was a human being, why is the argument for 921 years over whether this image had a human nature or not? See, that was astounding to me when I found that information out. Now let's go into the Council of Ephesus. I'm sorry, the Council of Chalcedon. 451. At the Council of Chalcedon, which was called in 451, it was called to, let's say, continue or bring to an end the polemic over whether this image of Christ, now Christ, was Serapis, had a human nature or not. Mm-hmm. So they came up with a lot of dogmatic decrees, mm-hmm. and which was signed into law by that body of priests and priestesses at the Council of Chalcedon in 451, saying that what went on at the Council of Ephesus is valid, and we are no longer going to argue the point whether Christ had a human nature or not. Mm-hmm. We're going to end all arguments on that point. And when they closed the Council of Chalcedon in 451, you know what began at that moment? Christianity began. That's when Christianity officially began. This is history I'm talking about. Has nothing to do with traditional religious theology as practiced and preached by ministers and theology schools.
What did the Coptics believe in? Because it seemed to me that there was a connection between the Coptics and early Christianity. I mean, you know, that they believed in that. What was the belief of the Coptics?
Well, see, which Coptics are you talking about?
The Egyptian Coptics.
No, see, you had two schools of Coptics there. You had the Melkite Coptics, who became, because they're the ones that created this image that's known today as Jesus Christ. They created that image from the image of Ptolemy I. Mm-hmm. So they were the Melkite Coptics, who later became the Diophysitic Coptic Egyptians. The word Diophysitic means a person who believed in the two natures of Christ, mm-hmm. thus becoming Diophysitic, or the image that we know today as Jesus the Christ, becoming Diophysitic, having a human nature and a spiritual nature. Okay. Versus the Monophysites. Mm-hmm. See, you got those two communities. Okay. The Monophysites said that this image that we know today as Jesus the Christ had only one Osiris nature, but no human nature. See, so you had those two schools there coming out of the Coptic community. What the confusion is today is that the term Coptic is synonymous with Christianity. Mm-hmm. That's not true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
You see, that's not true. So you got to really go into history and find out about the Coptic community, because you had two divisions there because of that polemic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But what I'm trying to get at would be the essence of their teaching, the morals, the values, the history of that story, like the Christ story has a history. When did that evolve? I mean, what were they teaching before that evolved, or did they just transform the Isis and or Isis and Horus story, Haru, into the Christian story of Mary, Jesus, and God?
That's the base foundation of it. Okay. Everything came out of ancient Egypt. That's your base foundation for all religions, especially Christianity, and including Islam, and including Judaism.
But what are the changes that they made? That's what I can see where they replace, as you have already explained, Jesus with Horus, and tried to make Jesus and Osiris one and the same, the Father like the Son. But what were the foundational teachings? What was the essence of the religion that people believed in, and how is it different? I know that you said that in the Egyptian belief system, their worldview, one was innately born with spirituality and connected to God.
No, connected to the omnipotent, universal, spiritual.
Correct. I'm sorry.
Creator, okay. Not God.
How did they? Yeah. So they made that change. Go explain that. Go into that.
No, go. You finish defining what you're trying to say.
I'm trying to look at where we departed. since this transition was made and part of the teaching seemed to have been kept, since the foundation is Egyptian belief system, worldview.
Okay. This is, go ahead.
Go ahead. They didn't totally eradicate it.
No.
They just slipped in the image, the replace, but they had to do other things to confuse us. What were they?
Okay, see, you're right at it, Reverend, is this. You have to go always in any subject back to the origin, or try to find the origin of any subject that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. If you don't go to the origin of the subject or subjects that you're talking about, then you won't know anything about the subject.
Okay.
See, that's very important for any researcher or anybody who is seeking the truth. Mm-hmm. Find the historical origin, where this, what you're seeking, the subject that you're seeking, where did it begin and where did it start, by whom, what caused it to come about.
Okay. All
right, now, you just said, and I agree to that, that the foundation of Christianity was comes from the ancient Egyptian culture and civilization, using the ancient Egyptian divine triad of Osiris the Father, Horus the Sun, and Isis the Holy Hathor Cow Mother. Okay, and from that foundation came the use of that foundation became the foundation for Christianity. Mm-hmm. Okay? Now, what happened, this is what you have to understand. What happened through the years of time, people, places, and events, which creates and makes history. Through the years, different people throughout history used that foundation of the ancient Egyptian and began to embellish it, to florilegize it, mm-hmm. to embellish it. So you can take one word, just one word, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. and you as a minister can attest to this. You can take one word, and you can take the word, let's say Christ, or you can take the word God, as mm-hmm. This term is used in all religions. Mm-hmm. Just that one word, you can preach a whole sermon on that one word. Mm-hmm. Because you know, as a professional minister, you'll know how to florilegize that, embellish mm-hmm. around that one word. Mm-hmm. So what they did, through the years, theologians and different people of authority, using that foundation to embellish around the ancient Egyptian divine triad. And one of those persons in history is Desiderius Erasmus. Very, very important. Mm-hmm. Because he was the one that created the New Testament. Mm-hmm. See? So by him being an ex-Roman Catholic priest, he knew the theology of Christianity mm-hmm. to the point that he was an authority on it, because he was trained in that discipline. Mm-hmm. You see that? So when he came out in 1516 with the world's first created New Testament mm-hmm. called the Novum Instrumentum, 1516. 1519 they changed it to Novum Testamentum. 1535 they changed it to the New Testament. Mm-hmm. So he knew that. So he was one that embellished on that. Okay, using that foundation. Another person you can trace in history, I can give you a lot of names, is Lancelot Andrewes mm-hmm. in the 17th century, who created the King James Version of the Bible. Also, he and his group of theologians creating the King James Version also created the gospel, the fourth gospel, called John. You see, let me tell you something else about John. What happens in John? Who becomes a Jew in John? Christ. That's when Christ became a Jew, in John. Mm-hmm. That's his history. That's historical.
Now, the story of Christ, as we know the story of Christ, when does it come about? as we know that story today?
That's called patristic traditional religious theology. Has nothing to do with realism or history. It's strictly traditional teachings. It is taught to the believer and written in biblical form, because the Bible is the literature for the believer in Christianity. Those stories have been written, as you stated, by different theologians, different people writing the Bible. Okay? Erasmus, Desiderius Erasmus, coming out in 1516, an ex-Roman Catholic priest, writing the Synoptic Gospels, or the New Testament, known as the Novum Instrumentum. He added 6 other manuscripts to that. He added 1 and 2 Peter, 1 and 2 Corinthians, Galatians, and Epistle to the Romans. Those are 9 manuscripts that make up the New Testament. But those manuscripts was created by Erasmus. Okay? Adding to the story, or adding to traditional story that is in religious Christian theology today and taught to the theologians. Okay? Now, you go back, you have, like I said before, a history of the Bible. And you find, when you go into the history of the Bible, you'll find different people who has added their 2 cents in writing the Bible. You heard of William Tyndale?
Yes.
Okay. William Tyndale was a friend of Desiderius Erasmus. And he was the first man on earth to translate Erasmus' Novum Instrumentum, which was written in Greek, into English. And this was done in 1524 and 25. Okay? Then you have the next person writing a Bible was Miles Coverdale, 1539 and 1541. He wrote 3 Bibles. The Great Bible for Henry VIII, and he wrote the Cranmer Bible for Thomas Cranmer, who was the ecclesiastical spiritual advisor to Henry VIII. Then he wrote the Geneva Bible. So in writing these different Bibles, coming from different people using different perspective, they're going to add certain things to the Bible to expand the literature for Christianity, which is made part of the traditional teachings now in Christianity. Then you go up to the Douay Bible, coming out of France, written by the friars, which the word friar means Christian brothers. They created a Bible. They came out with a censored Bible in 1583. That was a censored Bible written by them for the Roman Catholic Church, put into this Bible called the Douay Christian Bible. The things that they wrote in this Bible was information that the Pope wanted to put and have put into this Bible, because at that time you had the Renaissance era had begun, and the masses of people throughout Europe were beginning to learn to read and write. So what he did, he had this Douay Bible created, And these friar brothers who are Christians, Roman Catholics, created this Bible in 1583, what is known as the New Testament, a revision of the New Testament. But it was censored. Certain information could only be put in. You see? Now, I'm going to get up to your question. And I'm going to remind you of the question. Now, let's go back. Let's continue on, rather. So in 1610, those same friar brothers, Roman Catholics, came out with a censored Bible on the Old Testament. You see? Because going back, the first printed Bible that was printed on earth was in 1475, printed by the Jews. The Old Testament that was printed in 1475 was printed for Christians, not the Jews, because the Jews did not read no Old Testament. They used the Torah and the Talmud. So it wasn't for them, it was for Christians. You see? So now, going back to where we're at now. So in 1610, they came out with an Old Testament Douay Bible, the Roman Catholic Church, which was a censored Bible. Now, going back to 1475, this Bible that was printed, which is called the Pentateuch, or the Old Testament, was written for Christians, for the sole purpose of getting the Christian community who had been taught negative things about the Jews, getting them to begin to like and love the Jews, because in the Old Testament it tells you to love the Jews and that the Jews are God's chosen people. Is that true?
Not as far as I know. I mean, that's true in the Bible.
That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm talking about. I mean, I'm talking about I know you're talking about in reality. That's not
people I know is African.
This is true, but I'm saying in the Old Testament now. We're talking about Old Testament written literature now.
Correct.
Okay, this is what is being taught in traditional theology is what I'm saying.
Yes.
That's all I'm saying. So now, in 1611, after using a group of theologians to help him write what is known as the King James Version, I'm talking about Lancelot Andrewes and his group of theologians creating the King James Version. And when that happened in 1611, John was added. They wrote John. And in John, guess what, Reverend? Jesus was a Jew. Because if you get a Bible concordance and you look up Jew in there, they refer you to Jesus being a Jew in John. All through John. Not in the other three Gospels. And that was done on purpose.
Now, the Old Testament, or the Talmud.
Of the who?
The Talmud, what the Jews, what they call the Old Testament. What was that? How did that come about? And what is the accuracy of that? When did that originate and become a instrument of teaching and the Jewish books?
Well, the Jews never had an Old Testament. The Old Testament was strictly written and produced for the Christians. Okay, and I gave you a little historical.
But they are books. I mean, well, let's start this way. Who are the Jews? Where did they come from? And how did they evolve in terms of a religion? Okay,
now, what I'm about to tell you, Reverend, no one on earth is going to tell you this. Now listen. Judaism, of the three major religions, is the third religion of those three. But they teach you just in reverse. They said that Judaism was first because they said that Jesus Christ was a Jew. So Judaism was first. They say after the death of Jesus Christ, then came Christianity. And then they're going to tell you that Islam is a combination of Judaism and Christianity. Historically incorrect.
How so?
Because I'm going to tell you now. You have to know the historical origin of Judaism. It was a man by the name of Solomon bar Isaac between the years of 1080 and 1100 who created the formula for Judaism by creating Sefer HaYasa literature. Sefer HaYasa means, Sefer means books, Ha means of, and Yasa means of the upright ones. Okay. Books of the upright ones. Who are the upright ones? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob.
All right.
Okay? Those are your upright ones. Later they added Solomon and so forth and so on, and other names. Now, what did Rashi, who is Rashi? Rashi was a Lombard. Let me tell you this, I'm going to make a statement. You never heard the statement before. In order for anybody of any race, creed, or color to find the historical origin of Judaism as a religion, you have to know the history of the Lombards and the Templars. Then you will find the historical origin of Judaism. You got to remove yourself from believing in traditional religious theology as being taught by these various religions. That's what you have to cease doing. See? So Rashi created the formula for Judaism by creating Sefer HaYasa literature, which is the base foundation of the Torah. The Torah is handwritten, used by a rabbi to teach the believer. Okay? The believer has to learn what the rabbi is teaching him from the Torah by way of memory. That way that individual internalizes the laws, the rituals, the customs, and the ceremonies of Judaism. See, so you have to start there first to understand where these Old Testament literature and Bibles come from. Then you got to study Rashi, you got to study Jacob ben Meir, who's Rabbi Tam, you got to study Moses Maimon, called Maimonides, who's called Rambam. You see, it's a process. You got to study the Lombards, you got to study the Templars, all of that. So if you don't know all of that, then and if you believe in traditional religious theology, you got to throw that out. Traditional religious theology, you got to forget that. You got to take the Bible and throw all that in the garbage can. You got to take this dead white man on the cross, throw it in the garbage can. You got to clear and clean your system out of all religious ideas, beliefs, and thoughts and everything, and start all over again. And go after the historical origin of any subject, and then you will run into this. So it took me going on 25 years to find all of this.
Well, I guess what confuses me is that, I was in Israel, and they took us and showed us the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they said that these manuscripts went all the way back to before Christ. Found them in a cave there. How is that true? I mean, in terms of your research, would those documents, which were supposed to have been on, scrolls, and they were supposed to coincide pretty much with the same Old Testament that they have today, which would mean then that the Old Testament existed before Christ and has continuity to it. How would you explain that?
First, say that's not true. The Dead Sea Scrolls are 20th century European fakes. They have an exhibit in Chicago called Inside Egypt. When you go in the museum, the Field Museum in Chicago, they have a big sign on the wall telling you how they, the Europeans, can make a fake document to look so authentic that it will fool the expert. That's how they can do it. Number two, when you look at the alphabet that was written on these Dead Sea Scroll supposed manuscript, that alphabet is called by the European scholar community as Old Hebrew. And what they did, they took your ancestors, the ancient Egyptians, phonetic alphabet, and they're calling it Old Hebrew. And they created a stone called the Salam inscription, which is a fake. They made it. Okay? And they can create all these things. If you go into the University of Chicago, Johns Hopkins University, all these universities anyway, go down in their basement, they create what they want to create. The archaeologists, they go over in these countries and they dig in the ground. And you know what they do at night, Reverend? They plant certain artifacts. Now, I have evidence of that because there was a male and a female archaeologist complaining to the Archaeological Society of the methods of how they, at these digs, how they, in the middle of the night, go there and plant artifacts to be found the next day. This is Europeans reporting on Europeans, some of their trickery. But getting back to the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this supposed Hebrew alphabet is ascribed to being the alphabet that was created by Rashi. Rashi is late 11th and early 12th century individual. Now these Dead Sea Scrolls supposed to have been dated back during the BC time.
Correct.
Coming from the caves, the Qumran caves in and around the Dead Sea.
Right.
Supposed to have been written by the Essene Society. Okay? That's not true. It's never been in the same.
I see it. I see it. That's it. Yes.
Essene. Essene.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
However you want to say it. Okay? Now, what I did was to prove to myself that the Dead Sea Scrolls were European fakes. I went over to a university class, I took a class at the University of Chicago. They were offering a DSS class, a Dead Sea Scrolls class. And I wanted to go over there and find out what these white folks was talking about and how they call themselves validating the Dead Sea Scrolls to try to make it valid. You know, they had fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls passed around all over the world for different scholars to, let's say, decipher and come up with some type of consensus on to what was written on these scrolls. They never came about. You know that, don't you? It's all in the scholar community. It never came about.
Yeah, consensus,
Yeah. So what I'm saying is this. I went to the University of Chicago to take this DSS class, Dead Sea Scrolls class. What the Europeans are using to validate the Dead Sea Scrolls is that they're using 4 names. Josephus, which never existed as a human being. Philo Judaeus, which never existed as a human being. Eusebius Pamphili, or Eusebius of Caesarea, who never existed, supposed to be in the 4th century. Historian for the Roman Catholic Church. In the 4th century, there was no Christians no church, and no Christianity. Okay? And they use Pliny the Elder. Those are the 4 names that they use. And there's never been a Pliny. See? So what they are doing, they are teaching this from a university point of view. It's in their system. So if Professor Charles Dudu out of Chicago University says that these manuscripts are valid, who is going to argue with him in the secular community? Because everybody looks up to these various universities.
Correct.
You see? So this is how they get away with it. I just gave you a short overview. If I had more time, we can go into more details if I had a classroom to teach from.
So we're going to see if we can set that up. But I want to ask you another question that will confuse a lot of people, because they will go back to Rome, the Church of Rome. And the Church of Rome has been around since what? The 4th century, 3rd century AD or earlier?
Not true. I just got to telling you. Let me give you how to measure Christianity.
All right, but include this in your answer, because they claim that the Romans used to kill the Christians, and then the Romans converted to Christianity. Constantine made Christianity the state religion, but the Roman Church was around when? Give me the dates when the Roman Church was established.
I'm going to give you that.
Okay, good.
Constantine, during the time of Constantine, there was no Christians, no Christian church, and no Christianity. That's the 4th century. Okay?
Okay.
And see what they're doing, they're measuring Christianity from the supposed death of Jesus Christ, who was supposed to have died in 30 A.D. Right. There's never been a Jesus Christ. And how you measure Christianity is this, Reverend. When you go through history and you come up to the time of the Council of Ephesus, and this is all in my book, that's where they took the image of Serapis and made it into the Christ, the Messiah.
So when does what they call the Holy Roman Church begin? I'm
going to tell you that. I'm going to come up to that.
Okay.
But we first have to clear up about Christianity. You see? There was no Christianity during the time of Constantine. My book attests to that. If an individual tells you about a Christ, Christianity, or Christian church before the Council of Ephesus and before 532, when the world's first Christian church was built on planet Earth, and that was in Turkey, in a city called Constantinople, built by Justinian and his wife Theodora. That's history.
In 532.
532. That's in my book. It took them 5 years to finish it. In 537, they finished the Hagia Sophia. Okay? So, if anybody come and tell you that there was a Christianity or Christ before the Council of Ephesus in 431, they are historically incorrect. If anybody come and tell you that there was a Christian church prior to the Hagia Sophia being built in 532 by Justinian and his wife Theodora, they're historically incorrect. Okay? Now, getting to your story, your question rather. The Hagia Sophia is the first center and the first university for the Europeans. Okay? And the faculty and the teachers in that university, the Hagia Sophia and church, were Africans. They were your Coptic Egyptian Africans. They're the ones that taught the Europeans a semblance of civilization. Not what George M. James is saying in Stolen Legacy, that the Greeks studied with the ancient Egyptians during the time of antiquity. No. That's not historically incorrect. Where the Europeans got civilization from the Africans came out of the Hagia Sophia, from those African teachers who made up the faculty there. See, I'm telling you something nobody else is telling you.
Yeah, you sure are.
Okay? That's in my book also. Okay? So, that church was in control during the time of the Byzantine era. The head of that, the ecclesiastical power, was in the hands of the emperor, the Byzantine emperor. Because at the Council of Constantinople II, Justinian took back the donation of Constantine from the African Melkite Coptic Egyptian community.
Took it back.
Took it back. Ecclesiastical power. See? So now, whoever was the patriarch in the Hagia Sophia was put there by the ruling Byzantine emperor. Okay? So now, let's go on. Let me give you a short overview to get to your question and give you an answer for that. Over the period of time, the city of Constantinople, which was the seat of the Byzantine Empire, was being constantly threatened by invasion. Okay? Long story short, Constantinople in the year 1453 was penetrated by Muhammad II, who penetrated Constantinople and seized the Hagia Sophia, thus turning it into an Islamic mosque at the time. Okay? Now, that's in 1453, right? 8 years prior to that, they took the See, S-E-E, which is the seat of Catholicism, out of the Hagia Sophia and put it in the and began to build a see outside of Rome. Started to build the Vatican. This is in 1445. That's the date. That's your answer to when did 1445. You see, they started beginning to build St. Peter's Church, and it took them 181 years to build and finish what is known as the Vatican, because they started with St. Peter's Church, and they began to build other buildings all around that St. Peter's, and became St. Peter's Basilica. So they finished it in 1626. This is history. You see that? So now you got, once they went over there, when the sea was moved from the Hagia Sophia, because it was being invaded, that's where the church and state separated. See, prior to that, the church and the state was under one control, the Byzantine emperor. But when they went over to Rome, on the outskirts of Rome, and created the building of St. Peter's Church and the Vatican, which is on the outskirts, they built St. Peter's Church over the supposed tomb of Peter.
Correct, yes.
There's never been a Peter, because there's never been a Christ. You see? So this is this is what they tell the people. They put this in into their school system, into their universities, and they teach it to men and women. And they get away with it. You know how they get away with it, Reverend? Because the individual who is attending these universities, getting these degrees, they came into the world. Their parents introduced them to various religions. And they became and grew up as believers in these religions, all through their adolescent ages and stages. You see? Up and through grammar school, all through high school, all into college. And now they decide I want to be a theologian. Still, when they went to theology school, still had their belief. So they get away with all these different things, because that same person being trained by the universities in these different schools and universities, they now are going to be qualified to go into the same system that taught them to regurgitate to another generation.
Try to get all the time I can. So, would you please continue explaining that for us?
Okay. About the beginning of what is known as the building of the Roman Catholic Church in Rome. Like I said before, they didn't start building St. Peter's Basilica until 1445. And it took them 181 years later, they had finished it in 1626. At that time, they had created other buildings surrounding St. Peter's Basilica, and thus those other buildings made up what is known as the Vatican, or the Vatican City. And when they came into that area of Rome, coming out of Constantinople in Turkey, they made it understood with the Roman government that the church and the state has to be separate. So this is what they did. So that caused the separation of the church and state to come about. And that's how historically the Roman Catholic Church in Rome began. But prior to that, Catholicism and the seed of Catholicism was in the Hagia Sophia, in Turkey, in Northeast Africa. And that's, as I gave a short overview prior to this statement, is how everything evolved and came about historically. Now, I mentioned something a little while back about how these various religions, such as Christianity, Islam, and Judaism came about. I just touched on it briefly, but let's go back to Judaism. One has to know that Judaism is a man-made religion like all other man-made religions. That the main body of Judaism is based off of pseudepigrapha Perky Aboth literature with incarnated names using fictitious stories attached to it. That's what it's about. And then when you get into Christianity, the literature that makes up Christianity is pseudepigrapha, patristic, colloquial theology and philosophy with incarnated names using fictitious stories attached to it. Now, let's get back to the term incarnate. How does one incarnate a name? It's very simple. You make a body for that name, you put flesh on that name, and you create a story to that name. So you attach a story. So when you attach the story to that name, the name that you're using never existed in human form, but when you attach a story to that name becomes a real life, live person in the mind of the reader or the believer. So if you take, for instance, the name Henry. Henry is an incarnated name. Henry never existed on earth in human form. I'm going to show you how they incarnate a name. Henry lives in Buffalo, New York. Henry is married to a Buffalo, New York school teacher by the name of Helen. Helen and Henry, they have 2 children, Flaxton and Flaxine. And every Saturday, Henry, Helen, Flaxton, and Flaxine, they go to the grocery store to do their weekly shopping. Every Sunday, Henry takes his family to church. Now, that story that I told you, using incarnated names of Henry, Helen, Flaxton, and Flaxine, those names never existed in human form. But when I tell you that story, or a person tell you that story, the story in your mind, the names coming from that story in your mind become real. They become human beings. See? Now here you are, a little child in school, and they're giving you a storybook to read. The stories in the storybook becomes real in that child's mind. But those stories, using those names of supposed people, never existed on earth in human form. Now suppose you take those same story, or that same story that I told you about Henry, and put it in the Bible. Then the people have been taught that the Bible is the Word of God. Not to ask questions. Don't question the Bible. Just believe it. You see? So therefore, you have a group of incarnated names in the Bible, in the system, the religious system, and the school system that the Europeans has created. And now you have a minister up there regurgitating these same pseudepigrapha incarnated stories to the believer in the church. So this is how it's been done and passed on from generation to generation. And see, nobody has came along to define what they were doing but me. Nobody has come along to stop them and tell the truth about these various religions but me. My message is for the African community in America and around the world. I've written a book, The Historical Origin of Christianity. There's never been a man that ever walked the earth in human form of any race, creed, or color by the name of Jesus Christ. That book was written for one race of people only. If other races of people want to read it, so be it. I can't stop them. But that's what it was written for.
Dr. Williams?
Yes, sir.
We want to thank you so much for your delivering to us this vital information. And we look forward to having you back. As a matter of fact, I look forward to coming to Chicago and continuing this series with you. Okay.
The main thing I want is my information to get into the African community in America.
All right.
Okay? And by any means necessary. So, and then for all my efforts and hard work of finding this information, I want to be given the credit for it. That's all I ask.
That we shall do.
Okay.
Gladly. And I'm going to give you a copy of this
okay.
to take with you.
Wonderful.
Now.